Good morning, everyone. Welcome to season 2 of Social Studies Online. It feels really good to be back. My name is Eden Cho. I'm a museum educator at the National Museum of American History. We understand schools look different for many people, so whether you're joining us live or watching us in an archived version, we're happy you can join us. As a reminder, we have brilliant educators and curators from the Smithsonian with us today, so please ask any questions you may have during our time here by commenting in the chat box. We ask that you keep your private information private. And if you'd like, you can follow along by accessing all of the resources you see today in the Learning Lab, and I've included that link in the chat box. We hope you enjoy, and I'm going to turn over the introductions to our host today, Orlando Serrano.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you again, or good day for you, depending on when you're watching this. We're glad that you are joining us for a conversation about Latino Heritage Month. And we are excited that we have a couple of folks with us today. For the first half of our time together, we're going to speak with Magdalena Mieri, who works at National Museum of American History, and she'll introduce herself in a little bit. And then for the second half, we're going to have Steve Velasquez, who also works at American History, and we'll get to know him a little bit in the second half of our time together. But to start off, Magdalena, welcome, and thank you for being with us. Can you tell us a little bit about your work and what you do at American History?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Eden. Thank you, Orlando. It's lovely to see you again. And I'm delighted that this first or the fall session of this series is focusing on Hispanic Heritage Month. That's wonderful. So yes, my name is Magdalena Mieri. I work at the National Museum of American History. My title is Director of the Latino History and Culture Program. I also focus some of my work on civic engagement initiatives. The program is 15 years old. It's quinceañera this year. And throughout the 15 years, we've been able to work to feature the collections, the stories, and the complexities of people of Latinx origin in the United States. So thank you for inviting me today.
Excellent. Yeah. No, thank you for being with us. And before we get started and look at our first cultural resource, could you tell us a little bit about what is the theme that is connecting all of these before we get started? How did you decide to put some of these artifacts together?
All right. That's a good question, because the Latino presence in the United States is very long and very complex. So you pose an interesting challenge. And I decided to focus on two themes mainly. One is women. And that is because this year, or throughout last year, 2019, 2020, we've been celebrating the women's right to vote, like the centennial, of course, 100 years of that fight to be able to vote and become fully and rightful citizens in this country. So Latinas have been part of the struggle and the story. So I wanted to celebrate them today. And also with them bring the theme of belonging and belonging in citizenship, and how these different women that we're going to briefly talk about bring to life their personal stories in the making of the United States as we know it today.
Thank you very much. So just to make sure, we're going to talk about women and the role of women in Latina history in the US, or what we now call the United States, and as well as belonging. And with that, let's go look at our first resource. And you mentioned that the presence is long and varied and complicated. Can you please tell us a little about Isabel Varela del Valle and why we're starting here?
Absolutely. So Isabel Varela del Valle, it's somebody that we call Californios. Californios were people living in what is today California and the Southwest from the time that region of the country was part of Mexico. And I love always to start telling stories about Latino presence in the United States from the West Coast, right? As opposed to the East Coast and the arrival of Europeans to the East Coast the history of Latinos is really, it starts in the Southwest, and also with indigenous populations that were in those areas. Even before any European arrival, those communities were still present without borders. California, the Southwest was part of the Virreinato de Nueva España, and there were people that were occupying these lands, that were ranchers, had cattle, were growing their livelihoods in this area, and that dramatically changed in 1848, and with the westward expansion, the occupation by the U.S. of all those lands, the Mexican-American War, and then ending that war with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So by that treaty, all that land becomes part of the United States, and therefore all the people living in the region became U.S. citizens. Not so quickly, though. They had to be able to gain citizenship, they had to demonstrate that they own land, and that was the case of the of Isabel and her families. They were ranchers in Ventura region of the United States, and had to fight to defend their lands and their belongings and claim U.S. citizenship. So she's the first lady that I'd like to bring to you today, in reminding you of that long-standing presence in the West region.
Thank you. Thank you very much for setting the historical context and for letting us, think about the longer history of what we now call Latino presence in the United States, and that it might not start with the same story that folks are familiar with when they think about settler colonialism on the East Coast. We've got to look on the other coast as well. All right, our next cultural resource here is a lovely apron, and I enjoy aprons. I use them every evening, and this is beautiful. Can you please tell us who this is and what you would like to share about this particular apron?
Absolutely, I do love aprons too. They are super handy. But this one belonged to a lady called Sonora Sanchez, and she was a migrant from Mexico. She came to the United States right at the time of the Mexican Revolution, like many communities that trace their roots to this history in Mexico. She migrated with her husband to Texas first, work on different fields as farm workers in Kansas until they established themselves in California. And I like to bring Concha Sanchez to you because she started a tortilleria, one of the first commercial retails. And she did this once established in California and in the 1930s during the Great Depression. Her husband had passed away, Abundo Sanchez, and she had to make do and provide for her family, for her children. And she was among the first women to use an electrified tortilladora. And I believe my colleague who will follow in this conversation with you today, Steve Velasquez, will talk some more about her business and food and food history. But she is one that is part of a movement of people after the first settlement, if you will, of Californians that migrated from Mexico to create communities, Latinx communities in the Southwest.
Okay. So interestingly enough, we were going to talk about the prep, but it didn't make the cut, which is because we have so many wonderful resources, and we thank you for sharing them. We are going to need to go a little bit faster because there are so many that we want to get to. So the next piece here is interesting to me. I appreciate that there's an autograph here that Fabiola put her signature on it. Can you tell us a little about who she is?
Absolutely. So Fabiola Cabeza de Vaca Gilbert is in New Mexico, and she was born in New Mexico and in 1894. So she's kind of forced this post-Mexican American War, settled, her family was settled there. She was an educator, a teacher, and particularly worked in rural areas. And she was very active in education, of course, when the Big Depression, right, the 1930s hit. And she saw the conditions of those families as she was teaching their children, right, in these rural schools, and decided to be active and do something about it. So she enrolled in an organization to help educate, work with families on how to best preserve foods and on cooking. She's claimed to be the inventor of the U-shaped taco shell. So, but among her accomplishments and the fact that I want to bring her as part of this mix of women is the fact that she wrote a couple of cookbooks that were really maximizing the resources that families had in these rural areas. And she also created a radio program, one of the first Spanish radio programs, to bring her message and these educational messages about food conservation and best and food waste to families throughout New Mexico.
That's very interesting. It's interesting to learn about sort of Julia Child before Julia Child, right? That we've got another woman who was teaching and sharing through public education, some ways, and informal education, how to cook and how to use what you have. All right, we have time for one more highlight, and then we're gonna quickly go through some more resources. And the last person we're gonna focus on for an extended story is Clotilde Arias, and it's an interesting story. Please share her story with us and how this certificate of naturalization sort of ties up with the important role she plays in U.S. history.
Absolutely. So Clotilde Arias is one of my favorite women. Maybe I might identify with her as an immigrant myself. She grew up in Iquitos in Peru and with her family. So Iquitos at that time was a super important city because of all the caoutchouc growing, the rubber tree growing. So at that point, the industry starts to fail. Her family loses everything. They decide to move to the Caribbean. And then from there, she moves to New York City at age 22. And she was a musician. She was a piano player, and she wanted to pursue her studies in music. In New York City, though, a reality for many migrant families, she had to start from scratch and got married and had a child and started working as a composer. The reason she's important, and now like leaping over like 20 years of her life, but I understand we're coming to our time together, is that she created the first singable Spanish language translation of the Star Spangled Banner. So there's been versions of the Spanish versions of the Star Spangled Banner before in the 1910s and 1920s, but she really, as a composer, as a musician herself, she was able to create the same music, the lyrics in Spanish. So in addition, she was working in Madison Street in the advertising company, different companies when women were still not allowed. So she is among the first ones to be working in that field, and also interesting during the late 1940s with during the Good Neighbor policy and Pan-Americanism. She has an important role in women in bringing them together to discuss the Americas. So she is an amazing leader that unfortunately passed away way too young at age 58. But I'm proud that the museum collected her story, collected the music, and her archives.
Yeah, it's a wonderful story of using one's talent to contribute to the community that she wanted to be part of and sort of lift up together. Thank you for sharing that, Magdalena.
Sure, and I'm sorry you asked me about this resource. This is her naturalization certificate. Yeah. So talking about belonging and this journey, and then to actually have the right to vote in this country. It's another aspect that we bring, not only the culture, but also we get into politics as well in our practice.
All right, now we're going to do a quick run through some other highlights if folks are interested, some other resources that we have available in our collections. All right, Magdalena, who do we have here?
All right, this is amazing. She was known as the Latin bombshell. Her name is Diosa Castello. She was a major actress, theater performer, musician in New York City in the 40s and 50s. and lived 100 years. This is one of her costumes of South Pacific, from South Pacific theater performance. She's part of this sort of wave of migrants from the Caribbean. She was born in Puerto Rico. The next resource is somebody born in Cuba that are really central and mainstreaming Latin music and dance and performance in New York City in the 50s. These are Celia Cruz's famous shoes. She designed them in collaboration with the maker, who was Mexican, Mr. Nieto, and these are same as her wigs, and her glasses are the staple of who she was. She flew Cuba at the time of the revolution to become U.S. citizen. Of course, Selena, it's another figure. So as Celia and Diosa were performing in New York City, a couple of years later, Selena is mainstreaming Tejano music in the Southwest and then to the whole nation. Born in Texas, she started singing in English and then crossed over to Spanish, and her major achievements or awards that she won were in Spanish. So this is again women like bringing our culture, centrality, and regional differences. I couldn't leave you without bringing in the importance of women in science, and this is Ellen Ochoa, an astronaut, an amazing figure in research of and data visualization. She is co-owner of 3 different patents.
Wow! All right.
And to finalize, one of my favorite women, Sonia Sotomayor. So I couldn't leave you without bringing the importance of participation in politics and in justice and in the system. And Sonia really came from very humble beginnings in the South Bronx, raised mostly by her single mother, a nurse, who is the first Latina in the Supreme Court Justice.
Thank you very much, Magdalena, for those detailed stories of these women who participated in earlier moments in your history that we maybe did not know about, and for creating a through line to our contemporary moment and women who more recently have made contributions through music, through performance, through the sciences, and through politics to U.S. history. Thank you very much. We are going to slowly transition. Does anyone have any questions for Magdalena before she steps out for a second? And we welcome Steve. Eden, is there any question for her as we transition over to the second half of our time?
There is one. I know we covered a few different musicians. We have a question of where can I listen to her music?
For Celia Music, I invite you to click on the link that will be shared about her exhibition. We feature quite a bit of her. And of course, Selena, you can go to, I don't know if I can do commercial announcements, that kind of the usual sources that you might go to listen to music. But please use the resources that we have as in the institution.
Thank you, Magdalena, and we'll see you in a little bit in case we have some more questions. Thank you. And as we transition over, I do want to let everyone know that we are going to have links to Learning Lab collections down in the comments, links to the different exhibits or object records for the parts that are being used throughout our time together, as Magdalena just alluded to. Please follow those links. They're going to be available for you after we are here. All right. Next, we are joined by Steve Velasquez. Steve, thank you for being here with us. Can you please tell us a little bit about your role at the museum, a little bit about your work?
Well, good morning, guys. Good morning, Orlando. I'm a curator at the National Museum of American History. So what that means is I take a material object, I take a thing, stuff, and we use those as entry points to talk about events in history, people in history, topics and themes in history. And so I work with cultural and community life, mainly Latino history. And I've been at the museum 20 years using material culture to talk about the Latino experience in the United States.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Steve, we appreciate you joining us today as we're trying out something a little bit new in terms of how, for folks who are joining us, whether they're caregivers, educators, young people, thinking about how to engage with and interact and analyze material culture. So we're going to try something out with you. And before we learn a little bit about the particular artifacts you brought with us in terms of some of the details, we're going to ask you some questions that if you were, in a classroom or at home and thinking about how to analyze visual culture, this is a thinking routine that you can use. And in particular, this is something called See, Think, Me, We. All right, so Steve, you ready for me to ask you a few questions?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, so we're gonna pretend we've never seen this before, but with your position as a curator, you're out looking for different material culture that will do a lot of the questions that we're asking here. So this is probably relevant to when you're out doing some collecting work or thinking about how to collect something. So the first question we have is, what do you notice, like just off the bat, as we're looking at this particular artifact, what is it that stands out to you that you notice right away? What do you see?
I see a language issue. Puerto Rican American sugar refinery. That was the first thing that stood out to me. Not Puerto Rico, but Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I had the similar reaction, which, then the second question. So again, we're doing See, Think, Me, We. So think, what do you think about this, right? When as right away, you're, confronted with this linguistic language dissonance where matters don't seem to be matching up. What are you thinking here?
I'm thinking as a role of curator. So what can this tell me about Puerto Rican history? It's in English. What can that tell me about the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States? What can this tell me about sugar? And why is there a bag of sugar? Why do we have a bag of sugar? And why is that important?
Excellent. Now, we're going to go to me. So what connections do you make, between this particular artifact in your own life? What is it recalling for you?
A couple of things. Sugar. I don't know. I love pastry. The coffee with sugar, right? And so I'm connected to that. Why, and fundamentally, why is sugar important, and why do we have it, and why is it so readily available?
I appreciate you working with us on this, Steve. And so as we're working through, you pointed out some language matters. You've also pointed out that, you're thinking about how this can connect to Puerto Rico's relationship with the mainland United States. And then in terms of everyday life, pointing out that we use sugar on a daily basis. And for some of us who enjoy pastries, it might be more important than other people, right? So it's definitely a part of our everyday life and existence. Now we think about this community-wide, right? So if we go to we, how might this story of sugar, as you're thinking through, this as part of our collection, or if you were going to go out and think about collecting this, how would you see this tying into a larger story about the world and our place in the world?
That goes back to what I said first. Puerto Rican American sugar refinery. There's a long, complicated relationship between Puerto Rico and the mainland United States, and its relationship to the United States. Puerto Rico, as you know, was a Mexican colony. A Spanish colony for a long time, and then, boom, 1898. Spain gave it up, gave it to America. America took it over, but it's not a fully recognized state in the United States. And so, for me, something like this is just like kind of an entry point to talk about that kind of relationship, and then why, why the United States has Puerto Rico, what was important about it, and so that's what this makes me think about the we.
Thank you for pointing that out. Like the ways in which this connects us to a former imperial power, right? And that it's now ours. How does that position us in a global community? Within our own hemisphere, the connections to the Spanish Americas, or what we call the Spanish Americas. Do we know why it was spelled Puerto Rican, by the way? Is that an answer that you have?
It's a interesting, complicated issue. So Puerto Rico was kind of the phonetic way Americans, people in the United States, English speakers would write it out. And for many years, in the 1800s, Puerto Rico was how it was spelled in newspapers and correspondence, even communications with politicians. And it was that way until about 1930, when after the United States took over Puerto Rico, Puerto Ricans lobbied to officially get it changed back to what it was, kind of furthering, kind of getting away from that imperialist mentality that it's just about United States, but they're Puerto Ricans and they don't say Puerto Rico, they say Puerto Rico. And so there's you can look at that fight and kind of get a sense at the history of imperialism, the history of identity.
Thank you. All right, we're going to practice with one more artifact, and this is, we decided to go with a few different kinds of artifacts. So we had an object, and now we're going to go with a poster, some more visual art, and we're going to do the same thing. So what do you see here, Steve? What do you see? What draws you to this?
I see rows and rows of lettuce and lots of diverse people.
And as you're noticing these things, what are you thinking about this here? What are you wondering?
I see people working, and I'm wondering. I see the words boycott lettuce and grapes, and I'm wondering, are these people boycotting? Are they? What are they doing?
Or maybe even, and why are they why should I boycott lettuce and grapes? Right? And if it is a case, and then what are some of the connections that you see between your experience and this particular poster?
The same way. I mean, why would we be boycotting lettuce and grapes? Everybody has those things in their refrigerator. But then again, what is the role of the workers in this picture, and food, the food that we get? What is that relationship between labor, work, and everyday life?
And as we, for the we part, right? I want to draw our attention. I'm looking away from the computer because I happen to see folks who are delivering goods, right? So how do we tie this to the community workers who are doing what we now are calling in this moment essential labor, right? How do we connect this moment to our current moment?
Yeah, exactly. It was for me, talking about this current moment of the inequalities and problems that we see in the food world with what we call essential workers, right? Migrant workers, low wage scale workers who are out in the fields earning money in heat and smoke with pandemics coming around. And so for me, this was a direct connection to that kind of thing. And this poster was not done, in March, April, or May of this year, but in like 1972.
Yeah, and so Steve, for folks who may not be familiar with, right? Like there's California's on fire, and a good friend of mine grew up in Salinas, which is in the Central Valley, around where Cesar Chavez and the UFW did a lot of their organizing around these particular agricultural products. And he's a visual artist, and he went and took pictures of his family's work on a daily, and it's a lot. It is a lot. But what more context can you give us about this particular poster and the UFW?
So the United Farm Workers, the UFW, was a organizing group. They started a union for farm workers to organize themselves and lobby for better wages, better housing conditions, healthcare, that type of thing. And so they tried to get the farmers, the farm laborers together and ask the growers for these. And sometimes the owners would say no. And so they would try different means, strikes in the fields. And when that didn't work, they decided, hey, grocery stores sell these products. Let's go to the grocery stores and have people be our voice. And so they organized boycotts. And so here, lettuce and grapes were being grown and picked by non-union folks. And so they wanted to reinforce that idea that it's about equity, it's about justice, it's about equality.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you for bringing these two, food-based. The first theme we had was thinking about women and belonging in Latino history in the U.S. And now we're thinking about food and the work and the labor that Latinos do day in and day out. And we're going to end with one more, and we won't ask you more questions. We won't do one more thinking routine, but if you could please tell us about this very beautiful shawl and how in many ways it combines the themes that Magdalena brought to the focus and the themes through food that you brought to the focus, to the center today.
Sure. Yeah. This lovely shawl has a big story behind it. You would just think it's a piece of cloth you wrap around, but it actually belongs to a woman named Amelia Seca. She was an immigrant from Mexico who immigrated when she was 13 back in I'm going to get the time wrong, 1963 or 64, I forget. She migrates with her family, with her father, who is a paid farm worker in the Napa Valley, and she migrates with her family to California, and she ends up being a grape farmer. She starts a vineyard of grapes, and is one of the first Latin American women to own a vineyard in that part of the country. And for those of you who don't know, it's a very expensive land. It's very highly prized land. And so she becomes one of the first women owners. This particular piece was a wedding gift. And for me, it ties everything together. It was a wedding gift from someone in her family from Mexico. And she would wrap her children in it and carry around her children when she was working in the fields. And you can see images of women wearing their shawls, carrying the children, or she would use it as kind of a picnic blanket. She would spread it out and her kids to eat lunch while she was working in the fields.
That's a wonderful story. And you can see here some of the grape stains, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's very worn, very grape stained, very loved. Very loved.
Wonderful. Well, Steve, thank you very much for taking time to be with us and sharing some more stories connected to our larger theme of Latino Heritage, Hispanic Heritage Month that we are kicking off this week. Now, for folks who are curious and want to know more about Think Me We, this is going to be here. My internet is a little bit slow today. My Comcast is not Comcastic today, but the links will be available for you if you want to learn more. And as a heads up, the link will be there available in the comments box. And Eden, I'll let you have the last word as we start closing up shop for today.
Thank you. Thank you to our guests for joining us today. Thank you for our audience for being here with us. I did include a sign up for our newsletter because we are now back every other Thursday. So the next time we'll be here is on October 8th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. If you would like to keep up with our many educational programs, please sign up for our newsletter, writing comments. All of our social studies online videos are archived, so please come back and rewatch anytime at the same link. And we hope you all stay safe and healthy. Bye.
Bye, everyone.